It's not complicated. One strip of land, a measly 28,000 square kilometers.
To put that into perspective, that's roughly 4% the size of Texas.
And on this strip of land, there are 12 million people, each of whom aspires to live peacefully, to work, to develop. But years of war have divided the land and warped it into one where peace seems impossible.
So here are the three most important things you need to know in order to understand the situation today. The 1967 border, known as the Green Line, is the internationally recognized border of Israel. The 1967 border gives Israel 78% of the land and the Palestinians 22%.
In Israel today, there are 8.5 million people living within the 1967 internationally recognized borders. Israel also controls 60% of the West Bank, Area C. There are 550 to 600,000 Israelis living beyond the 1967 border, on the 125 settlements recognized by Israel, and 100 outposts not officially recognized by Israel.
A significant portion of Israeli settlements is expected to lie within the Israeli border after mutually agreed upon land swaps. In addition, the Israeli settlers are not a homogeneous group. About 2/3 of the settlers would agree to be resettled if Israel were to withdraw from the West Bank. It is the remaining third who present the major challenge. In 1948, there were approximately 750,000 Palestinian refugees displaced. In total, today, there are 5.3 million Palestinian refugees, those displaced in 1948 and their descendants, living in different places.
In the West Bank, there are 2.9 million Palestinians, who live mostly in Area A, controlled entirely by the Palestinian Authority, and Area B, controlled jointly. In Gaza, there are 1.8 million Palestinians living on a small 360 square kilometer plot of land. Hamas controls Gaza, but Israel controls the entry of goods, capital, and people.
So that's the picture. But the two sides see this picture very differently. Palestinians say to Israelis, "Isn't 78% enough?" Israelis say to Palestinians, "The question is not the border, but what happens beyond the border, and we must ensure our security." And this is where we stand today.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm Kito De Boer. Although I live in Jerusalem, for most of the last 20 years I've lived in Dubai, and my forum is here, and I've learned that wherever your forum is, that's where home is. So welcome to my home. I was asked to speak about the general topic of making the impossible possible, and I think that's because I had spent 30 years as a management consultant when John Kerry and Tony Blair asked me to move from my comfortable life in Dubai and resettle in Jerusalem to become head of mission of the Office of the Quartet and start to get involved in the peace negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I was also asked to talk today about a couple of topics. They said that they would like to hear about, well, what's the state of play, what's the status quo today in terms of the peace negotiations, where are we and where are we going? And then to talk a little bit more about the Office of the Quartet that I'm head of, which focuses primarily on economic development with a specific focus on investment. And I want to do that in 3 steps. First of all, just give you an overview of what the Quartet is. Then to talk about the status quo, where are we going? And then finally, just to give you an example of the type of work that we're doing. So what is the Quartet? The Quartet comprises the Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, and the foreign ministers of the US, John Kerry, the EU, Federica Mogherini, and Russia, Sergei Lavrov. And each of those 4 have their peace envoys, and those 8 people account for my board of directors, if you like. They're the people that I report to and have the discussions with. Within the Office of the Quartet, we are about 35 professionals with offices in Jerusalem, Gaza, and Ramallah. and that is about the largest group of people completely dedicated to the peace process based in Palestine. So what is the state of play? The current state of play is one where there is a significant shift going on in the world at the moment, and it's a shift from negotiating towards something positive, a two-state solution, to a shift where we are now trying to prevent the imposition of a unilateral outcome on the situation, which we call the one-and-a-half-state solution. So let me just explain to you what I mean by the one-and-a-half-state solution, and let me expand a bit on how we got here. So what do I mean, or what does the international community mean by the one-and-a-half-state solution? As you saw on the video earlier on, the 22% of Palestine, which Israel is beyond the green line, is split into Area C, B, and A, and Area C, which accounts for 60% of that 22%, is under full Israeli control. And when we talk about the one-and-a-half-state solution, what we really mean is that Israel is unilaterally looking to annex that part of the territory, that 22% of the territory that remains, leaving Palestine as a rump 10%, which again, if you looked at the video, is basically islands of urban centers, not a coherent and viable Palestinian state. So how did we get here? What is the evidence to suggest that Israel is beginning to look at imposing a unilateral solution and has abandoned the negotiation table? Last year was the 20th anniversary of the start of the Oslo peace process. And there was a lot of review of what had actually been achieved. 20 years later, where were we, and what implications did we draw from that? At the start of the Oslo peace process, the Palestinians were broadly meant to do three things and the Israelis one thing. The three things that the Palestinians were meant to do was, first, to recognize the borders of the state of Israel, which they did. The PLO and Yasser Arafat 20 years ago recognized the borders of the state of Israel along internationally recognized lines, the so-called green line that you saw early on. The second thing that they were meant to do was build a state. At the time, it was the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and at that point, they created the PA, the Palestinian Administration, and the PA was meant to build the state of Palestine. And in 2011, the international community got together, the World Bank, the IMF, and the UN, and they looked at what they saw, and they said, yes, indeed, Palestine had been created as a proto-state. If you made Palestine a state the following day, it would be functioning. It wouldn't be the best performing state in the world, but it would be certainly better than a fairly large number of what are classified as failed states. So it passed two of those tests. The third test that it was meant to pass was it able to deliver security? Was it able to demonstrate that it was a good neighbor that would not threaten the state of Israel? Well, certainly when it comes to the West Bank, and certainly when it comes to the PA, the answer to that is very clearly yes. If you speak today to any of the senior security officers from the Minister of Defense downwards, and you ask them what is the nature of the relationship and the security cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, they would say that it is very good, in fact, that it's never been better. And in fact, it's so good that the Palestinian people are beginning to question whether the Palestinian security services are subcontracted by the Israelis to protect the Israelis, or whether in fact they are actually out there to serve and protect the Palestinians. So on all those three measures, they have performed well. It should be noted that when it comes to Gaza, Hamas are in control of Gaza, and that is very problematic. The Hamas are treated as a terrorist organization by most countries and are dedicated to the overthrow of Israel. So that is definitely a problem. But the core West Bank, and under the PA and under Abu Mazen, there has been extraordinary cooperation between the State of Israel and the State of Palestine. So last year, when there was a review done of did the Palestinians actually deliver what they were meant to deliver, the overall answer was yes, they delivered over 90% of what they were expected to do. Then they looked at the State of Israel, and they said, in the 20 years, what was it that the State of Israel was meant to deliver, and have they delivered that? Israel was meant to do one thing. It was meant to transfer land from Area C to Area B to Area A over a 5-year period. So 15 years ago, all the land that is currently the West Bank was meant to be transferred to Palestine once a state was formed, and to be the State of Palestine. That hasn't happened. There are many reasons why it hasn't happened, and part of those reasons is also the problems on the Palestinian side. But 20 years on, despite the fact that the Palestinians delivered what was expected of them to deliver, has the State of Israel moved forward on its path? And the answer to that is very clearly no, it has moved backwards. In those 20 years, it continued to build settlements, and the settlements were more than doubled. It continued to support outposts. It continued to appropriate land, water, and spectrum. And it has changed deliberately the facts on the ground to make a peaceful solution more difficult, not easier. So in that context, Secretary Kerry said, enough is enough. We have to put a stop to this. We need to be able to put a deal on the table which addresses the concerns of the Israelis. And as you saw from the video, their concern is less about borders. Their concern is more what happens on the other side of those borders. So a lot of work was done to prepare a package, and much of that package is well known, some of it less so. That package, first of all, looked at borders, and they agreed with the Palestinians on what the borders would look like. They agreed on the land swaps. They looked at the other issues to do with refugees and the future of Jerusalem. But where they focused most of their attention this time, in contrast on the past, was on the issue of security. General John Allen spent a year with the Israelis and said that we will provide a security backdrop that will be better to, or equal to, or better than what Israel currently provides. They gave a 10-year plan where the Americans would fund and do all the border security crossings and ensure the security of Israel. And I think everybody's conclusion to this was a darn good deal. And it was a surprise when it wasn't embraced. Now, historically, people have said about the Palestinians that they've never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. That narrative is now changing. People around the world who are involved with the peace process look at the facts on the ground and said, this time it was Israel that missed an opportunity. And that is troubling. But the international community did not give up. We in the Quartet said, okay, let us try to take this a step forward. Let us try to put together proposals for Israel to show that it is committed to going back to the two-state solution that was embedded in the Oslo peace process. Let's go forward and generate ideas that shows that it wants to move along that road of Oslo, maybe not as fast as was agreed 20 years ago, maybe not as bold as was suggested in the past. Let's just see if it's willing to make baby steps. And we came up with 100 different ideas, some bigger ideas, but some really quite small. And number 100, the very last one, involved absolutely zero land swapping. It was simply to build a roundabout, a traffic circle in a road that would provide access to land that had been sealed by this road that was Palestinian Area A land, land for 100,000, for 10,000 people near to Hebron, which is desperately short of land. There was no settlements nearby, no land nearby, and Kerry came in November with this offer on the table above the 100, and not one single one of those offers was accepted. And the message coming back is, no, not 1 millimeter. So when Kerry's plane took off in November last year, people knew that this was the end. There was no path to negotiation on a two-state solution. The path that we were on was a path to imposition of a 1.5-state solution. And that is very troubling for the international community. The international community is currently metabolizing that message. It is clear what the message is. And I think in the coming year, we'll see an increasing unfolding of the conclusions and the actions that the international community will take. It is not so much what they will do, it is when and how far they will go in what is an election year in the US. But there is already processes in place which will make what I'm saying abundantly clear. And there is an active debate about taking topics to the Security Council, and we will see whether those will be mandated or not. So that's where we are. It's a troubling position. We are not having an active, for the first time in history, we are no longer negotiating for a two-state solution. For the first time in history, the global community recognizes that we are facing the threat of an unilateral imposition of a solution, a 1.5-state solution, which everybody finds unacceptable. And I think we will see a period of increasing friction in future. And this is desperately concerning to everybody, as if there isn't enough trouble in the Middle East. All of this friction is around an incremental 10%. It is really hard for the international community to fathom why we are where we are. The deal on the table was a very good one. The Arabs reached out their hands with the Arab Peace Initiative, signed that deal, and we will have good relations and trading relations with you. The EU reached out their hands and said, sign that deal and we will embrace you as a much closer trading partner. The US reached out with tens and tens of billions of dollars and said, we will secure and underwrite your back if you sign this deal. But the answer was no. So let me now change tracks a bit in the last few minutes, talk to you a bit about, in this rather gloomy situation, why is it that we in the Office of the Quartet are actually quite happy and feel that we are making some progress in a very difficult situation. As Kerry once explained to me, he said, the more difficult the politics get, the more important the economics becomes. And I think that that is true. Because the international community is looking for new ways to engage on old problems. When the politics comes to a dead end, it's looking for new ideas, and some of these ideas are in the realm of economic development. We have created in the Office of the Quartet a new division called the OQ Invest, and that is purely there to take ideas which are generated and turn them into bankable, investable projects. And it is staffed with professional investors, the sort of people that most of you deal with on a very regular basis here. They are an injection of intellectual capital, of new and fresh intellectual capital, which is focused on the underlying question of how do we actually increase the level of capital investment in Palestine. And to give you a sense of the scale of what's required, it's not very big. The Palestinian economy is less than $13 billion. I mean, to put that into perspective, Facebook bought WhatsApp for $19 billion, and that had 50 employees in it. The stock price of Apple went up by $13 billion in less than 2 hours on July the 7th last year. So the entire economy is not big. The private sector has stopped investing effectively. It used to invest about 15% of GDP in plant and machinery. It's now below 5%, barely at replacement rate. For us to get back to where we were before is really about $1 billion a year. If only we could generate $1 billion a year, we could probably raise that in this room pretty easily at the moment. That should not be a huge target. And if we can put in about $1 billion of incremental investment every year into the Palestinian economy, we would not bring peace, but we would bring stability. We would be able to avoid the chaos that is likely to happen if we do not start to find a way of creating jobs and revitalizing the economy. So what I want to do is just give you one example of what we're doing to illustrate how we're moving forward. We are currently trying to create a renewables investment fund. In the West Bank, no power is generated. It is all imported from Israel. It is the second biggest import from Israel. Yet the conditions are ripe in the West Bank for renewables. The solar irradiation is high. The dust levels is low. The overall conditions are equal to, if not better than that in the UAE. There is reasonable wind. There has been no biogas that's been exploited. So we are trying to raise a renewables fund backed with green bonds to generate 350 to 400 megawatts of power. And we currently have a project which is an anchor project. We have been working with the government of Palestine. We've secured land in Area A, south of Hebron. Hebron accounts for 40% of the GDP of Palestine, so it's its major industrial center. And we are looking on this land to put projects of about 120 to 140 megawatts of solar power. We've engaged the international community who are committed to investing in preparing the land, to flattening it, building the roads, putting in the additional transmission lines and substations, so that commercial investors can simply focus on the core of the production itself, of the solar power plant itself. We've been working with the World Bank, the IFC, the EBRD, to come up with products to take away the political risk insurance. We're working with the World Bank and the IFC to backstop the power purchase agreement so that there's no risk on takeoff. We are putting together a deal which is very bankable. It has got rates of return which are in the low double digits for what has been now structured to something that is pretty low risk. We are working with the government of Israel, telling them what we're doing. We're getting them on board. They see no reason to oppose it. So we're making progress. We want to do something similar in the agribusiness, where there needs to be some foundational investment in things like cold chains, animal feed, and grain stores. These are things that are required to reduce the level of imports from Israel and strengthen the local agricultural base. So we have a path. We have about, at the moment, $800 million of project ideas. We're working with the President's office. We're working with the leading business people in Palestine, the people with the money. We're working with the international community and the Palestinian diaspora. We have a program and we have a plan. Will we hit $1 billion a year? Not sure. I think over the next 1 year, 2 year, hopefully we'll hit something like $500 million this year. Next year, we're looking at something that's closer to $800 million. These investments by the private sector will make a difference. It will not bring peace, but it will bring jobs and it will bring hope. And we hope that's enough to prevent the region sliding even deeper into chaos. And I'd like to finish with one last reflection and thought. If we get it right in Palestine, we can get it right in other countries. One of the most profound issues that we in this room have to deal with, and by the people in this room, I mean the business people and the next generation, is how do we deploy the massive amounts of capital that are locked up in established markets into those markets that most need it. The war-torn markets, the emerging markets, the high-growth markets of the future. Because we've never been so awash in capital as we are today. Companies have never been so flush. Yet, we aren't investing where it's most needed. And after Palestine, we know that we'll need Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq. If we are going to help these countries out of the state that they are in, where is that help going to come from? It's not going to come from governments. Our governments are stretched. Aid budgets are being reduced. It's got to come from people like us in this room, business people. We have the capital. We have to find mechanisms of deploying that capital into the places of the world which most need it. And to do that, we have to create a new hybrid model. We have to find a way of deploying what is the scarce resource, which is intellectual capital. We in this room have the intellectual capital to build the businesses and get the investment in those countries. The international financial institutions don't have that. They have the financial capital. We have the intellectual capital. We have to find a way of bringing private equity and our own investments into those countries. We need to create this hybrid model. So what I hope for, and what I think Secretary Kerry hopes for, and what most of the Quartet members hope for, is that what we are doing in Palestine is a precursor. It is the Petri dish for a new hybrid model for the future. And if we can get it right here, there are many other countries where we can get it right. But it will need people like you, people like YPO, to contribute not so much their financial capital, but their intellectual capital to take ideas and make them bankable. Thank you very much.